Hello everyone, this is Abhijit Dasgupta from 366 PyTech and welcome to another session of FLO Blockchain App Development by SkyPiCast. We will be having these live online sessions till 15th of September 2018 every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturdays at 9 p.m. IST. So don't forget to tune into all of those to continue in this journey of apps development on FLO Blockchain with us. We would like to thank Ranchi Mall for their continued support in our blockchain journey. We would also like to thank the entire FLO community and its dev team for all the support. In this session, we will continue our discussion on the FLO C SDK developed by 366Pi that we started in our previous session. In today's session, we will see the process of integrating the SDK library in an application. If we do a quick recap of what we discussed in our previous session, we discussed about the FLO C SDK, why the SDK is needed, what are its requirements, where can you get the repository from GitHub, how to clone it, and how to import it into your Visual Studio interface. We also did a walkthrough of the entire SDK project code and its architecture to see its various components and features available. So moving on to today's area of discussion, we would be talking about how to integrate the FLO C SDK in a Windows application. For this demo purpose, we are going to be integrating the FLO C SDK into a WinForm or a desktop application. So to integrate the FLO C SDK library in your application, what you need to do is you need to build the FLO SDK project in Visual Studio after you have downloaded it from the GitHub repository that we mentioned in our previous session. Once you build the FLO SDK project, what you will have in the build directory is a FLO SDK.dll file, which is the library file required to be integrated in any application that needs to use the FLO C blockchain, FLO blockchain. If you do not want to build the entire FLO SDK project in Visual Studio, what you can also do is you can just use the FLO SDK.dll pre-built or pre-compiled library file from the build directory of the FLO SDK project. You can either download the entire project and retrieve this pre-built file, or you can just download this exact only this particular file from the GitHub also. Once you have this SDK.dll file, what you need to do is you need to add reference of this library file to the application that you are going to build. Once that has been added, you just need to implement the SDK features as per the methods that have been defined in the SDK, which we saw in our previous section, into the application. So for today's session, what are we going to create? What we are going to be creating is a small Windows desktop application which will be accepting donations. The details collected for all the donations will be saved directly to the FLO blockchain data, to the FLO blockchain as FLO data. The FLO data can work as an immutable receipt for the donor who has made the donation. It will help the person or the organization who is taking the donation to keep track of the amount collected as donation. Since data committed on the blockchain is immutable, it will serve as a permanent reference for the transactions done. So the use case that we are taking up today is for a community called GOCC or Jharkhand Open Coffee Club. GOCC frequently organizes donation drives for social causes or to help for natural disasters like the recent Kerala floods. So like in any similar situation, people donate some amount of money and that is then collected and sent to the people in need. This small application is an attempt where we will create a donation collection app wherein the organization collecting the donation will keep record of all the collections directly on the blockchain. So let's go ahead and see how we can create something like this. Please give me a moment to stop this slideshow and go to Visual Studio to start the coding process. What you see over here in the screen is the typical Visual Studio welcome screen. What we are going to be creating is a desktop application, or also known as a Windows form or a WinForm application, which will have a UI for all the donation collection details. And then we will have a submit button, which when clicked will commit the data back to FLO blockchain using the SDK. And once that is done, what we will be doing is we will be showing the user a message whether the data has been saved to the FLO blockchain or not. If it has been saved, we will show the user a URL with the FLO block explorer with that transaction and the details. Obviously, due to the time constraints, we have kept the use case and the scope of the application limited. But obviously, we can work on it and create a much elaborate application in future. So let's start and create a new project. To start a new project in Visual Studio, what we need to do is we just can click on this particular hyperlink that you are seeing here or create a new project. Either you can create a new project from here, or what you can do is go to the file menu, go to new and click on project. Once you have the project clicked, you will see a bunch of project options that you can create. What we will be doing is we will be going to the Visual C# language on the left pane, and then in Windows Classic Desktop, we will be selecting the Windows Form App .NET Framework type of application for our need. What we will also be doing is we will be setting the .NET Framework or the target .NET Framework to 4.6.1. If you remember, in our previous session, when we talked about the requirements for the FLO SDK, we mentioned that the FLO SDK uses .NET Framework 4.6.1. So the application that is implementing the FLO SDK should also be built on .NET Framework 4.6.1. So let's just go ahead and create this application. We'll just create this application name as, let's say, FLO Donation App Test. And we'll just click on OK. So what will happen is Visual Studio will start a scaffolding process and create the project and its directory structure, and it will show you all the files and folders and options that have been created in this section, which is called the Solution Explorer, wherein the solution or the project is created and we can just move on from there. So what you see over here is a typical WinForm or a Windows Form application user interface in Visual Studio. A Windows Form or a WinForm application is basically an application with a UI which runs on a Windows desktop. So what you see over here is a basic WinForm or a form that has all the GUI components that can be attached to this. What we have here currently is only a blank form with a title bar and the control boxes and a bunch of real estate that we can work on. So what we will be doing here is we will just resize the application window as per our size. I think we'll keep it around this. So let's just start with the UI component of this first. And then once the UI part is complete, we'll just start with integrating the SDK and coding our application. Let's just start with the UI part. So what we'll be doing here is for the first starting, we will be changing this particular form title bar. So for that, we will just click on this form anywhere and we will go to this property window and scroll down where it says text. If you see the text value that is available here is form 1. We'll just name it FLO Donation App and hit the enter button. Once that is done, the title bar gets renamed to whatever we want it to be. Then what we are going to do is we are going to put a title bar over here and we are going to put some logo. Let's for say example, we are putting the FLO blockchain logo over here. So to put the logo, what we will be doing here is we will be adding this particular control from the toolbox, which is called the picture box. We'll just drag and drop it here. I'm so sorry. We'll just double click on it and it should create this control, and we'll just set the size of the image placeholder that we want and the place where we want the image to be. The next step here is how do we add an image to this? To add an image to your project, you can do it in many ways, but the image that process that I prefer here is I'll just click on project and add the image as part of the resource of this particular application, and then refer that image resource to this particular picture box. So you go to the project menu and you click on FLO donation app test properties. The name of this link changes with the name of the project that you have chosen. So just click on it. And in here you shall see a bunch of options that can be configured. What we are interested here is this particular section called resources. We will click on this particular link called resources, and we will go and click on this particular link called add resources. There is a small drop down list over here that we need to click on. Once we do that, we will just click on add existing file and click on add existing file, and we should be seeing a browse window coming up, and we will just select the image that we have for our application. So let me just see if I have any images available for the FLO. I have here the FLO logo that I have in PNG format. I'll just click on open, and it should add this into your resource. Just save the project once, and it should be available in any resource for use. Just close that property window, go back to this window wherein you were designing the UI, click on this particular text picture box, go to the properties pane of on the right side, and go to the section called image. In this section, you will see that the option selected here is none. You need to click this 3 dots that you have over here and select the project resource section, and then this particular name, which is FLO, for the name of the file that I added as a resource. You should see a preview of this, and you just click on OK. So once you click on OK, you should see that the image is visible over here, but it is not resized as per the picture box. So what we need to do is resize it as per our requirements. So we will go down in the picture bar, in the properties bar, and what we see here is an option called size mode. In this size mode, the option that is selected by default is normal. What we need to do is we need to just set it to stretch image. What it will do is it will stretch the image to fit the picture box that we have. So that's it. We have added the logo. You can just put in any logo or any type of images that you want. The next thing that we are going to be doing here is we will add some sort of label over here. So let's just add a control called label control. Just double click on it and it should be available over here. And what you need to do is just click on it and go to the properties, and in the table text section, just add any label of your choice, whichever you want to do it. So let's just call this label as GOCC donation app powered by FLO, and hit the enter button. So what you will see here is the text that you entered over here is available here. So let's just increase the font size a bit. Just click on it and go to the font size option. So in this you will see a font option, and in that you will see a plus icon which you need to expand. In this you will see the size which is set to 8.25 currently. I'll just set it to 12 and see how it looks, and hit the enter button. So it looks a bit larger, so I'll just keep it as is, and it will act as my label for the application window. What we'll be doing next here is we'll create a bunch of text boxes for the user to enter. For the simplicity of this demo, what we are going to be capturing here is we will be capturing the details of the for which particular cause the donation is being made, what is the amount that is being donated, who is the donor, his name, the address or the location of the donor, and who has received the donation. That's it. We are keeping it very simple at this point of time, just because we have a very limited time for this particular demo. So we will be adding a label by double clicking on the label control and dragging it over here, and we'll just add the text as, let's say we ask the person what is this donation for. So let's say we add the donation label as donation for and hit the enter button. So, and the label here says donation for. So there will be a text box attached to this, and that should be accepting the particular text that the user wants to set over here. So we will add a text box over here by double clicking, and we'll just place that as per our requirement, and we can just resize it as we need. So this is something, one set of controls is available for us. So what we're doing here is we will just copy this in two controls that we created. Hit the Control C button for copying and paste it as many times as we want for the different controls that we are going to be creating. So the next control that we need is for the amount. So we'll just paste these two set of controls and position them as per our needs. The next will be the donor name. I'm just copy pasting this, and I will change the text later on. Then the donor, say, address or the location, and let's say then who received the donation. And what we will doing here is we will also be adding a submit button, which the user will click, and the data will then be submitted to the blockchain. So here we have a control called button. We'll just double click on it and place it as per our requirement. So our UI controls have been created. Let's just configure them as per our needs. So let's just rename all these labels as per the requirements. So the second label that we are going to be creating here is for the donation amount. So we will again click on the label, go to the properties. In the text section, we will write the label whichever we want. So let's just say this is the donation amount. And the third one, again go to the text section. Let's say we call it the donor name. Hit enter. The next one is for the donor location or address. Let's say donor location / address. And let's say the last one, I think if you see, it has overlapped a bit. So I'll just select all those and use the arrow keys to move them a bit on the right side. So the last label that I'm going to be renaming is, it will say received by. So let's just keep these things simple and create this particular application based on these premises. The next thing that we are going to do is we will name these controllers. Name these controls. So in a WinForm application, basic WinForm application, what happens here is the UI or the interface part is a different file that Visual Studio creates, and the code that you write for all the events is a separate file. So if you see here is the file that we have created here is, its name is form1.cs. It has two parts. One is the designer.cs and one is the resx. So this is the resource file, this is the designer file, and the actual form.cs file is actually the code file which contains all the backend code that runs when any type of code has been written or code needs to be changed. So we will create that code in a separate instance. Once we click on the button, there will be an event that will be triggered, and our coding will be done on that particular backend code. So for that backend code to access these controls need to be having some sort of names. So these are by default named by Visual Studio in its default format. Like if you see, the first text box is called text box 1, the second one is called text box 2. So this gets a little confusing as to which text box is for what. So what we'll be doing here is we will just click on these and rename the control names to something which we can relate to. So let's just say that the first one, we rename the name parameter to txt for. So we will know that it is for this particular control, like the donation for value. The second one, we will call it as txt amount. I'm just prepending txt just to know that these are text boxes. So the third one is for the donor name. So let's just name it txt name or something. The fourth one is txt address. Let's name that. And the fifth one is received by. So let's say txt receiver. Okay. So we are pretty much done with the text boxes. The next thing that we will be doing here is we will be clicking on the button. We can name the button also. Let's say btn submit or something. And also, if you see the text that is written over here is button 1. So we need to change that also. So we'll just move, scroll down in the properties bar and see the text says button 1. So what we'll be renaming it to submit. So let's just say it submit. So we have this particular UI created, and we can just now start with the coding process. I'll just click on Control S to save this as this point of time. The next thing that we are going to be doing here is we are going to attach the FLO SDK DLL file along with a Newtonsoft JSON.dll library file, which is required to parse all JSON values that come from the blockchain. So what we will be doing here is we will be going to the FLO SDK project that we have. This is something that you will be getting once you download this from the GitHub repository. In that, you go to the FLO SDK folder. Under that, you go to the bin or the binaries folder. In this, you will see two folders called the debug or release. Generally, when we create our applications on the Visual Studio, the output goes to the debug because we are running this particular IDE in debug mode. If you want, once your application is finalized and ready for production, you just change this to release, and the output will then go to the release folder, which will just segregate debug and release versions separately. So currently we have the SDK available in the debug folder. So if you go to the debug folder, you should see two DLL files. One is the FLO SDK.dll, which is our actual SDK connector library, and a Newtonsoft.json DLL, which is a supportive DLL, that is the third-party supportive DLL, which actually handles all the JSON request and response. What we will be doing here is we will just copy these two files and add it to the debug folder of the application that we are currently creating. So the application that we are currently creating is named as FLO Donation App Test. So we will just go to the Visual Studio project folder in documents directory of your computer. Under that, you go to projects. You go to the application that you just created, that is FLO Donation App Test, or whichever you named it to. Open the folder, then go to the bin or the binaries folder, go to the debug and just paste this. And you have these available in your debug folder. Let's just go ahead and add them to a reference of this particular project. To add any DLL or library to the reference of a project, what you need to do is you need to click on this particular link called references. Just right click on it and you have an option called add reference. Click on that. And once you click on this, you have a bunch of reference DLL libraries that are available as part of the .NET framework. So what we need to do is we don't need these particular DLLs right at this point of time. We are going to be attaching those two DLLs that we just copied. So just go to browse and click on this browse button at the bottom of the window and select the application folder that you just created, FLO Donation App Test. In that, go to the folder of the application, then binaries, then debug, and then select these two DLL files and click on add. Once you click on add, you will see that these two checkboxes have been added to those two DLL files, and you just click on OK. Once you click on OK, those two DLL files, if you see, the FLO SDK as well as the Newtonsoft.json file are available as part of the reference of this particular project. So we have successfully added these two references to our projects. So let's just move ahead and continue with the coding part of this particular application. What we are going to do is, once the user is coming to this particular window, he will be entering the data that is required in these text boxes and clicking on the submit button. Once he clicks the submit button, we are going to prepare a transaction to be sent to the FLO blockchain, create the FLO data text as per our requirements, which we will see later, and then submit that transaction to the blockchain. And if that transaction is successful, we should show something over here with a success message or something, and we'll probably also show a hyperlink which will take the user to the FLO Block Explorer with the transaction ID that was just created, so that he can just see what transaction has been done in the Block Explorer. So let's just keep this simple and see how that can be done. So for that to happen, the event that we are going to be working on is click event of the submit button. In Visual Studio, in a WinForm applications, writing event codes is very easy. What you need to do here is, if you want to code the submit button, click event, you just double click on this particular submit button, and you should go to this particular CS file or the C# file, which is the actual backend code file. If you see here is, we have this particular function created, which is the btn submit, which is the name for our button, underscore click. So this particular function was just created by Visual Studio automatically when we double clicked on it. So it understood that we want to write a code for the click event of this particular button. So let's just start and do our coding. So for the starters, what we are going to be doing here is, let's just have some sort of predefined address for where all these transactions will go to. If you recall, when we talked about flow transactions, what we discussed is, whenever we need to do a transaction, the transaction source will be the wallet that we are currently using. This is the test wallet that we have seen in our previous few sessions. And in this particular wallet, we have a bunch of testnet data that we are using to do our transactions. So any transactions that we do through the SDK is going to be done through this wallet and its balances. But what we also need is, in a transaction, is we need a destination address where this transaction will be sent to. So what we will be doing here is, we will be creating a small address, a receiving address in this particular wallet only, so that the amount of flow that we transact for this particular application comes back again to our wallet only, so that we expend very less amount of flow, just the transaction fee. So what we are going to be calling this particular address that we are creating here is test. Let's say it's called test donation address, and we'll just click on request payment, and it has created a address for receiving flow. So what I will do here is, I'll just copy this particular address and use it as part of my application. So I'll just go to the application that we were creating. In this particular application, like any object-oriented programming language, we have a class called with the same name as our file, which is form1. In WinForm applications or web form applications of Visual Studio, these classes, which are automatically created, these are called partial classes, because they are not fully they cannot be fully categorized as a whole class or a full class, but they are not a non-class entity also. They are class, but they do lack some amount of features in comparison to a class. So they are called a partial class, which include UIs as well as code behind data. So what we will be doing here is, we will be creating a public variable, which will be used to store the address that we just created. So let's just create a variable called donation address, which will be a public accessible variable with static keyword, meaning this won't be changed. The data type would be string, and we name the variable as a donation address. And we will be storing the address that we just created in double quotes, because in C#, string values are stored in double quotes. So once that has been created, what we are next going to do is, if you remember in the previous session that we talked about the FLO SDK and the FLO SDK test application that we created, we needed to initialize a few parameters in the app.config file, which will be used to actually initialize the SDK with the username and password, the RPC username and password, as well as the wallet URL and the wallet port for the Flow wallet that is run. These details must also match with the flow.conf file. So let's just open the app.config file and add those details over here. If you see, this is an XML file that is used to store configuration details in any C# WinForm applications. What we will be doing here is, we will be adding a section called app settings, and in that we will be adding some keys and values to store our details or the configuration details for the Flow wallet. Let's start with a particular node called app settings, and let's just open this and a closing tag. Then we will be creating some add keys with a key parameter or a key attribute saying username, or let's say RPC username, so that it makes clear that it is for the RPC. And we will have a value which will actually contain the FLO wallet RPC username that I am using. For this particular demo purpose, I am using a username that I have attached in my FLO.conf file for the demo purpose. Then what we will do here is we will have another node created for the RPC password. So I will have RPC password, and the password that I am using here is this one. So the third option that we want here is the wallet URL. Let's say its name is wallet URL. And since the wallet is residing on my own computer in this exact computer, we will be using the localhost URL. So we will say it localhost, http:/localhost. And the wallet port that we are using, I have used the default port that I mentioned in the session where we discussed FLO.conf file. I'm using the default 7313 port for the FLO blockchain wallet. So I'll just create these options and click the save button to save these configuration files. So to access these keys and values in our application, what we need to have is we need to have a reference to a particular library of .NET framework, which is called the system.configuration. Until and unless that particular library is referenced into your application, you won't be able to access these configurational file values into your application. So let's just go ahead and add the reference by right-clicking on the reference section in the project, and then clicking add reference, and then going to the assemblies section over here. This assembly section will actually show all the assemblies or the libraries that are available in the .NET framework that you are using, in our case 4.6.1. What we will be doing here is there are a bunch of libraries that are available. So we need to search our particular requirement, and we will be typing system.configuration. So if you see, it has a filtered list of libraries that match our search criteria. So what we need is this system.configuration library needs to be added. I just need to click on this checkbox and click the add OK button. So it should show that this particular configuration has been added. So let's go ahead and proceed with the coding. So what will happen now here is, once the user clicks on the submit button of the UI, he should come into this particular function. In this particular function, we will be preparing a transaction that needs to be sent to the blockchain. So let's move ahead slowly and start with the process. What we will first be doing here is we will be creating some variables to first access these particular values. So let's just go ahead and name a few values and access those app config values. So let's just say username is equal to, there is a package, there is a class in the configuration system.configuration, which is configuration manager. If it is not coming in your auto suggest, once you type this, you can just move your mouse over here, and you should be seeing a potential fix option, and it will say that this particular class is found in system.configuration. So you just say using system.configuration. So once you use that, it will add it as part of your imports or using. So once that is available, you see the color of this change. So in configuration manager, what we need to do is we need to access the app settings, and in that we will be calling the get function. In the get function, we will just use the name of the key that we used. So the key that we used here is RPC username. So we'll just type RPC username, and this particular line of code, what it will do is it will access the app.configuration, find the app settings with the key RPC username, and fetch its value and store it to the username variable. So we'll just do this for the 3 other configuration parameters that we did. I'll just copy paste this and name the parameters and the values as per requirements. So let's just say the second one is password, and for that password, the key name is RPC password. Let's just say the third one is URL or wallet URL, and I guess I named that the same. And the fourth one I'll name as wallet underscore port, and the same name I have used in my configuration key also. So we are set with these 4 lines of code. We have all the configuration options for the FLO wallet that have been set in the app.config file. So next part that we are going to be doing here is we are going to be creating an object for the FLO SDK RPC methods that we have defined in the FLO SDK library. For that, we are going to be we are going to be creating a object of a class called RPC methods, which is available in the FLO SDK. So in here, see, you are seeing a red wiggly line, which means this particular requirement has not been imported into our application. So just move your mouse over here, click on this bulb icon, and you see that FLO SDK dot methods class has needed. So once you do that, you just can use it. Or what you can also do is you can just click on this particular, or you can just type in using FLO SDK. So the entire package will be used, and any classes in that will by default be used. So we will be doing is using FLO SDK. So once you use that, all the particular values in this particular RPC method can be used. But for that, you will be seeing this type of coding style available. So if you don't want this type of coding style wherein you are having the package name, then the class name, and under that you see this particular, what you can do here is you can just move this, and as we were doing earlier, we'll just individually add all the usings for this. For this particular, you're just going to be using FLO SDK dot methods. So that is available. Then we just need to instantiate an object variable, and we will be creating this particular object with the RPC methods and its constructor. So once you create an object for this particular method in SDK, you need to pass these 4 parameters that we just accessed from a configuration: the username, password, wallet URL, and wallet port in this particular order. So the first is the username. So we will just use the username variable that we just defined earlier. Then will be the password variable that we just defined above, and then the wallet URL and comma, and then the wallet port. So these 4 variables that we access from our configuration value are being passed to the constructor of our RPC methods class to create an object which will instantiate the SDK and make it available for use. So the next thing that we are going to be doing here is we are going to create a try catch block. This particular try catch block will enclose all the codes that we are going to be writing to access our FLO SDK and do the transactions. So you write the try block and then the catch, and in the catch block we are going to be catching some custom RPC or FLO SDK exceptions that we have defined. If you remember, we discussed about those exceptions in our previous session also. So the exception class that has been defined in the FLO SDK is called RPC internal server error exception, if I remember it right. So you will see right now it is not being shown in color, so it means the class has not been imported. So we will just using FLO SDK.exception class. So it should be imported, and we should have our exception ready. So we'll just name this particular object as EX, and we can just have a code called var err code equals 0 or something, which will have the error code. Then we will have an error, let's say err message, to have the error message coming in. And we will instantiate this with an empty string, which we can write as string.empty. Then we will see if the exception has some RPC error code available. So we will add an if exception our exception has ex dot rpc error code dot get hash code. This particular function of our exception class actually returns the error code that has been written by the blockchain. If you remember, we talked about all the error codes that are written by the blockchain in our previous session. There is an entire error code class file that has been defined. So once if that is not zero, which means there is an error, so we will just store the error code into the error code variable using the ex dot rpc error code dot get hash code or the error code function. So this should return the error code that has been returned by the blockchain, and the error message will be available in exception dot rpc error code dot toString. So that should just return you all the messages that has been written. So once that is here, we can do a console.write for just for the purpose of debugging, whether if we want to see which error has come. So just write exception and some sort of, let's say, error code plus dash, and let's just separate this and with the error message. So console.write line should write this message in the console window and should not be visible to the user but to the developer. So this should handle the RPC internal server exceptions. What we also will be creating here is one more catch exception, block, which will handle all other exceptions that may occur in the try. So we'll just write a general exception block, which we will be calling with the ex1 object, and we'll just type in our console.write line and just mention the whichever error message has come. It will be a general C# exception, which can just be printed by the exception object followed by toString. So if you just write this, the exception that has been caught by this particular exception block will be converted to string and will be printed over here. So we have the try catch or the exception block ready. So let's just go to the try block and write the actual code that is required. So in the actual code that try block, what we will be doing here is we will first store all these text box date values into our particular into some sort of variables and then work on those. So we will just create variables called donation for, and it will be the text box which we created and named as txt for dot text. So this particular piece of code, what it does is it takes the name of the text box that you defined in this particular UI in the text box property, and in that there is a parameter called dot text, which actually returns the text that has been typed in this text box. So it should return that in a string format. So we have this. So what we'll do is we'll just repeat this for all the text boxes that we have. We have total 5 text boxes, I guess, 3, 4, 5. So I'll just keep on renaming these as per requirements. The second one was, I guess, name amount, and the text box was called txt amount. The third one was donor name, address, and received by. Okay. So let's just name it donor name, and its text box was txt name, I guess. Yes. Then was donor address, and its text box is called txt address. And the last one was received, or let's say receiver, and the text box was called txt receiver. So what we have done here is we have accessed all the text boxes that we created, accessed their text parameters, which in turn will return the text that will be typed by the user, and it will store those into these 5 variables that we have created. The next step that we are going to be doing here is we are going to create a variable called flow data, which will be the text that will be sent to the FLO blockchain as part of our transaction. What I would be doing here is I will be starting this particular flow data with some sort of an identifier. Let's just say 366Pi donation app, and I will just add a separator of hash and then add whichever message I want to be adding. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write a typical donation receipt sort of a message, which will say, like, says received with thanks from your name of whatever of your location of Ranchi or wherever you are, amount of whichever amount has been donated for the cause that you are donating for, and then we'll say that it has been received by the person who has received. So we'll create a dynamic text of that sort, and we will append this with this particular static text that we are adding with this hash, which will be added as the separator between our identifier and the actual text. I'll just explain you what I'm thinking of with doing this particular identifier. Once these transactions go into the blockchain, I will have the transactions IDs with me. But say if I am the organization who is collecting these transactions, and somehow I miss some of the transaction IDs and I don't keep them or don't record them, I do still have an option of scanning the blockchain for this identifier that we are using, and then accessing all the transactions that have been done with this particular identifier into the blockchain. So once I have those, this identifier, I can just do a quick scan of the entire blockchain. Not a quick scan, it will take some time, obviously, and it will search the flow data of all the blocks and the transactions and find transactions with the flow data matching with this identifier. So that is something I'm just planning on doing for a later session, which I'll also show you. And it's some sort of a flow scan utility that we already have in place for some of our applications. We'll do that something similar for this application also, I promise you. So I'm just adding a static content, which is called 366Pi donation app, then a separator called the hash. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a dynamic message, which will say received with thanks from the name of the donor. So that's the variable that we have. So we'll just add a plus or an append sign after our double quotes, and we'll just use the variable for donor name, which is donor name. Then again, we want to append some values, then again add a plus, then double quotes, the start of static string, and then we'll write off, then again a double quotes, then let's say we'll write received with thanks from your name, say XYZ, of the place where you reside. So that will come from the donor address. Donor address, and then we'll say the amount that was received, amount of the value for the variable amount, then say for whichever cause you are using the amount to donate for. Let's say we have that as donation for variable, then we again use the append, then let's say we add a full stop, and then we say received by whichever receiver's name has been put in the text box. So that will be in receiver variable. So we have a small sweet message that we have a dynamic message in itself, and we have the flow data available with us. So the next thing that we are going to be doing here is, if you remember in the previous session that we did, in the previous session we showed you that to do any sort of transactions or any RPC calls using the SDK, what we need to do is we need to just call this particular object, and in that we need to do the transaction or whichever RPC method is. So the RPC method that is available for doing any transactions is the send to address. So we will be doing a object dot send to address call, and once we start the parenthesis, it will show all the parameters that are required and the order. So first is the address where this transaction will be done. So we have that available over here as a static value in donation address. So the first parameter that we are going to be putting here is the donation address, where the amount is going to go. The amount or the decimal amount value or the flow that is going to be transacted, we are going to be keeping it very low so that we don't do a lot of flow expenditure. So we will do a 0.1 flow value. If you remember, I said that we need, whenever we use a decimal value in C#, we add a M, capital or small, to let C# understand that this is a decimal value. The next value is a comment and a comment to, which go actually to the wallet, and they don't serve a lot of purpose in the actual blockchain. So we'll just say test or something, or let's just say 3665 donation app, just to keep everything same. And this value will be used exactly in the comment to value also. So next is the bool subtract fee from amount. This is something that we talked earlier also. We'll keep it as false. And replaceable also, we don't want our transaction to be replaced by some other transaction which has higher priority, so we'll put it as false. The configuration or the confirmation target, we are just putting 1, so that any one transaction will make our target meet our target confirmations. The estimate mode would be unset, and the final value that we are going to be putting here is the flow data. So this is something that we have just created over in the previous line in flow data variable. So this is pretty much done. Our transaction creation using the SDK is done. But what we have here is, once we do this transaction, this particular function send to address will actually send you a string response. So we need to handle that also. The string response that will be coming back to us will be in form of a JSON. So we will be using the features of a Newtonsoft JSON reference that we added, if you remember there. In that, we have a class called JObject, and this particular class actually converts a string text, a JSON string into an object. So we are going to be naming here as JObj, and we will actually convert our entire response to this object. So we will be writing a JObject.parse, and we will putting this entire call of function into this JObject.parse. So what it will simply do is, it will call this particular send to address, do the transaction, receive the response, convert it into a JSON object, and store it into this JObj object. Now what we will do is this, we will just see whether this JObject has some error or not. If there is no error, we'll just say that the transaction is success, and if it is not, we'll say that the transaction is a failure. So we'll just add an if sentence, and it will have string dot is null or empty, and it will check the Java JSON object that we just received, and it will check a attribute in there called error, and it will see whether that particular error parameter converted to a string is empty or null. So if the error part is empty or null, it simply means that there is no error. It means that the transaction has been a success. So this if condition, whatever we write, this will be the success condition that we will be writing. Another else part that we will writing here is for when this error part is not null or empty, which means there is some error in our transaction. So this part will handle in case of error, and this if will handle in case of success. Okay, so let's just handle the success part, and let's just go ahead to our UI and add some other controls too. In case of error or in case of success, what we'll do here is we'll just put a label over here saying that the transaction has been a success or a failure. So let's just add a label over here, and let's just add a label, and let's just remove any text because we don't want this to be seen to the user. when they start. And we will also set this particular parameter called visible to false from true, and we'll just name this label as LBL message, and we'll just LBL message and hit the enter button. So this control has been created, which if you click anywhere else will just hide it. So if you just drag a box around it, you will just see this particular control available. So this is a control that has been created, and this control will be dynamically populated with text from the backend. What we will also be doing here is, if the transaction is a success, we will show the Block Explorer link. So we will just add a link label over here. So this link label, what we'll do here is, we will just add the text as, let's say, see transaction on Block Explorer, and let's just hit enter. So what this will do is, this will create a hyperlink which we will be managing from the backend, and once it's clicked, it will open a browser window, and it will show the transaction that was done after submitting this. What we will do is, we will also hide this during the initial process. So we will set the visible to false, and let's just name it as link label only, and let's just hit the save button. And this is, although you are able to see it now, when the program is run, you won't be able to see this until we make it visible. So we will do that in our this code section. So let's just come back and see what we are going to do if the transaction has been a success. What we will be doing here is, we will be creating a URL for our Block Explorer in the global variables section, and we will name it as URL. So we will be creating a public accessible string variable called URL, and we will be using a testnet Block Explorer. Let's just use https://testnet.floche.in, and in there, in the flow testnet.floche.in, if you add the URL with this /tx, and then again / and the actual transaction ID, it will show you the details of that transaction on the browser window. So we will be creating this static URL part over here, and we will be adding the transaction to this particular static text in the below code. So what if the transaction that we did over here, if it is a success, what we will be doing here is, we will just append the transaction ID to the URL that we just created. So we'll just say URL plus equal to, which is a shorthand for appending, and we will just append the Java JSON object variable that we just created over with the response, and in that there is a particular parameter just like error which is called result. So this particular result will actually contain the transaction ID that is generated after doing the transaction that we do is using the send to address. So the URL will be https://testnet/floche.in/tx/ the transaction ID that has been returned. The next thing that we will be going to do is, we will be setting the message that we just created using a label. We named that LBL message, and we will be adding a text to that. We will be adding that text using the text parameter and say that donation saved successfully. Let's just say that. And what we will also do here is, we will make that particular message show up in, let's say, blue color. So we will say the message dot for color is equal to color dot blue. These are all predefined C# codes, C# values that can be used. And we will also need to make that particular message visible. So we will just say LBL message.visible is equal to true. If you remember, we made both those labels and the link label as invisible, or visible equal to false. The next thing that we are going to do here is, we will just make the URL or the hyperlink visible also. So the name of the hyperlink control was link label, and we will make that visible as well. So we will do both these as true. So that's it. We are done here. In case this particular transaction has some error and the transaction hasn't happened, so what we do there is we don't update this URL because that is not available with us. We'll just say the message to we'll change the message to something like this: error, saving details to flow. And let's just change the color of the message to red from blue and make the message visible but not make the link visible. So we'll just explicitly again say the link label is not visible and this is false. Okay, so what we'll also be doing here is this particular piece of code that we wrote for in case there is a transaction error, we will write this same piece of code for all our catches also, just so that the user knows that the transaction hasn't happened. So I'll just copy the code that we written for the transaction error and paste that into both our catch blocks and just paste it. So we are pretty much done with our coding and let's just see what happens. So we will be going to this particular UI, and to run this we just need to click on this start button and our UI should come up. So let's just see if our application is a success and we could do some transactions on the FLO blockchain. So once it is compiled, this message comes because Visual Studio is building the app, compiling the app, and we should be seeing the output soon with the form that we just created. So this is the application that has just come up, and we'll just write the donation for, let's just say, Kerala floods. Oops. Let's just say I want to donate 1,000 rupees and my name is Abhijit. I'm the one donating. I stay in Ranchi, so my location is Ranchi. And let's just say it has been received by Ram. And we'll just click on the submit button. If everything goes as per plan, we should be seeing a message which says the transaction has been a success, and we should be seeing the link. Let's just see what happens. So we did have a successful transaction. So if you see, because our transaction happened successfully, we are seeing this particular piece of label which says donation saved successfully to FLO, and we are seeing this particular link over here which will say that we can see this transaction on the Block Explorer. If this particular transaction had not been a success, this particular message would have said error saving information to FLO in red, and this particular thing would not have been visible. So we will see that by closing the FLO Block Explorer and seeing that. But let's just say see what happened and whether our transaction got to the FLO Block Explorer or not. So let's just click on this particular URL and see what happens. Okay, so just I remember, we haven't coded anything for this particular link label, and the program doesn't know where to go when this particular link is created. So if we just click on it now, if you see, nothing is happening. So we need to write a small piece of code which will redirect our application to the dynamic URL that we just created, if you remember. So let's just stop this application and fix that particular bug. So let's just stop this, and what we'll do here is just to code for this particular links click event, we again just need to double click on it and it should open a function which is the link clicked function. So what we will be doing here is we will just write a small piece of code which will take us to the URL that is being generated into this particular URL variable. So for a link clicked, if you want to open it in a browser, what we write here is system.diagnostics.process.start, and it will require a parameter which will be the URL which we want to open. So C# is smart enough to understand that when this is called system.diagnostics.process.start, it with the URL, and the control that is calling it is a link label. It will definitely understand that this is a hyperlink, and the process that is needed to be started is the web browser, the default web browser that your computer has, and it will pass that URL to the web browser of your choice, whichever is the default browser, and will open. So I think this particular transaction should now be visible and the URL should be working. Let's just again start this application. So this application has again started. So I'm again going to be doing the same sort of a transaction. Let's just say Kerala floods. Donation amount 1000, donor name Abhijit, donor address Ranchi, and received by Ram. And we'll again click the submit button. And you see, we again did a transaction of 0.1 flow with this information to the block explorer. Let's just see if this particular transaction URL is working or not. Let's just click on this. And okay, so the browser is opening. And if you see, this browser is opening with the testnet.flowchain.in/tx, and this is the transaction ID that was generated when we did that transaction. It appended that to the static URL that we created a dynamic link, and opened this. And if you see this entire transaction, what we did, everything is written over here, the size of this, when is it mined. Since it is not mined right now, it says it is unconfirmed. And the most interesting thing that we need to see here is this flow data. So if you see, we have this 3665 donation app, which is identifier, and then we have this particular message that we sent, which we created dynamically, which says received with thanks from Abhijit of Ranchi, amount of 1000 for Kerala floods, received by Ram. So this is the transaction receipt, sort of a message that we did. In our future sessions, what we will be doing here is, for all these transactions that we are doing for this donation app, they are all available in different blocks. And if you see, I'm not saving these transaction IDs that I'm doing. So if I want to know how many donations have been made using this particular application, I will be using this particular identifier to search the blockchain for the blocks and the transaction flow data with transactions having this particular identifier, and I will have a list of transactions wherein this particular donation has been made. So that is something that we plan on doing in our future sessions. So I hope that this particular session and this integration of the FLO SDK into a WinForm application was interesting and helpful for you. Due to the time constraint that we have, I have tried to make this application very simple. Obviously, there can be a lot that can be done. We can create QR codes in place of these URLs when the transaction ID comes. We can add animations. We can for the process waiting and everything. We can do a lot with the UI and everything. But just due to the time constraint that we had, we just did a functional demo application that we wanted to show and showcase our SDK. So that is something that we intended on doing this session. So let's just move back to our presentation. So in this session, we created this particular Windows desktop application, which accepted donation information for something where we use the use case of the GOCC community. And the details that we collected on that application directly got saved to the blockchain. You saw that it can be done very easily using a few lines of code. Just the try, catch, and exception handling bit requires some extra lines of coding, but the actual transaction is just a one-line code. And you just need to set up that and you are pretty much set for doing transactions. So I hope that it was an informative and helpful session for you all. And as always, we would be happy to receive any suggestions, feedback, or questions regarding the sessions and topics in our email ID, abhijit@366pitech.com. We usually try to revert back within a day or two with your answers. We'd also request you to like, share, and subscribe our YouTube channel and join the Telegram group if you haven't already done. Also, please spread the word about SkyPiCast and the sessions so that we can reach more of you in future. Thanks and goodbye, and see you in the next session.